And pass things off to today's moderator, Udemy's VP of Leadership Development, Alan Todd.
All right, Jade, thank you. Hi, folks. Thank you for joining us from all over the world today. We've had thousands of registrations for this event on leading GenAI transformation, and we are humbled by the trust you place in us by investing your valuable time with us today. I promise you a lively journey. GenAI is a primary area of focus for many of you. We know that. To measure how leaders are meeting the challenge, we launched a public survey in January of 2024 and gathered more than 2,500 responses across industries, level of seniority, company size. And we saw responses on how leaders are stacking up with the expectations of their employees when it comes to some common behaviors that are critical to successful GenAI initiatives. We're going to unpack those research findings and blend them with some real-world examples from two expert business leaders who are deep in the throes of leading GenAI innovation at Udemy, a skills marketplace learning platform with 70 million learners from over 15,000 organizations. So I am thrilled to have with me today Karen Fashenda, Udemy's Chief People Officer, and Prasad Rajay, our Chief Product Officer. Karen and Prasad, thank you for joining me today.
It's so great to be here, and it's so great to see some friends in the crowd. Some of my former learning colleagues have joined today, but I'm excited to share some insights on how we're leading through AI.
I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be here, Alan, and join you, Karen, on this terrific conversation. Let's get started.
Throw that up. So we want to hear, where are you on your GenAI journey? Anywhere from we haven't explored it yet all the way to we're actively using it in our day-to-day work. So we're really interested in figuring out how hot a topic this is for the people on with us today. And okay, so let's get started by framing this moment within its historical context. So there's a lot of hyperbole going on. Anything from Sundar Pichai, the Google CEO at Davos for the World Economic Forum earlier this year. He said, AI is the most profound thing we're working on, more profound than fire or electricity. And Goldman Sachs predicts $7 trillion new dollars in global GDP. And then PricewaterhouseCoopers said that AI could contribute 15 trillion new dollars to global GDP. So I did a little thought experiment. If we think of that in new billion-dollar companies, that's 15,000 more unicorns that could be created with AI. So there's a huge opportunity. So Prasad, let's get started. You've been thinking about GenAI for a long time, what it means for us, and I've heard you talk about it as a sort of fourth big change in the way we create and transmit content. Tell us more what you mean by that.
Yes, Alan, let me talk about that. I see GenAI as the fourth wave of content revolutions. Let's show that picture. So if you look at the Gutenberg Bible, the printing press in 1454, I take GenAI's history all the way back there. Let me explain why. That event revolutionized content replication at scale. What does that mean? It means that we used to have manuscripts that were written by hand, and that's how books got created. Well, they weren't called books, I think, back then. And then when the printing press came along, you just had to typeset once, and then you could punch out 10, 100, 100,000 copies or millions of copies of a book. And that's what led to massive transformation of society, massive dissemination of information, creation of libraries and universities that were repositories of this information. And it really changed the world in a big way. Now, that's content replication. The next phase of this is the internet. All the way, you can call it 1971 when TCP/IP first came about, the ARPANET came about, or 1993 when the web came about. Doesn't matter in this historical scale of things. But what really happened with the internet is that content was able to be transmitted at scale at almost zero cost. So whereas we used to, in the previous phase, we used to send books and magazines and newspapers from one place to another, the internet made possible for us to not send atoms from one place to another. It made possible for us to send bits from one place to another over communication networks. And that revolutionized the world. And in fact, that fundamental capability of the internet is really with us today. And everything we experience about it is because of that underlying core construct of content transmission. Then came along the smartphone, 2008, and this revolutionized content consumption at scale. And this was the ability for everyone, no matter where they were, to be completely untethered, unwired. It could be in their homes, or could be up on a mountain, or could be out at sea. It could be anywhere, and they could consume this content at scale in a way that was extremely convenient, completely wireless. And of course, the types of consumption changed as well. You went from basic emails and websites to much more sophisticated capabilities in the form of video content, in the form, of course, of entire social networks were revolutionized because everyone was consuming this content at scale wherever they were. And that was the smartphone revolution. Now, fast forward to the GenAI world that was started off by ChatGPT in December 2022. And this really is the new world we're in. And it's as big or bigger than everything that came before it. I do believe that. And in the form of content, in the language of content revolutions, this is a revolution of content synthesis and content creation at scale. So this is where the content that we are talking about is not just generated and consumed by humans, but it's generated and consumed by highly intelligent machines or highly intelligent AI models that are able to do this in a near human capability. And when I use the word content here, this is content with a capital C, really. It's just about everything you will consume by way of reading, by way of listening, or by way of seeing of images or video. And there's a bunch of examples here on the screen, but the point about content is don't think about it as limited to words and documents. Think about it as much, much broader and in fact, content is everything that humans speak to each other, but it's also everything that machines already speak to each other in automated ways and APIs and so on. So this is why this is so big. And this touches upon us all as information workers. Information workers are fundamentally about creation and synthesis and understanding of content. And now we have this phenomenal capability that is augmenting that. We'll talk a lot more about that, but I wanted to set this whole stage about the content revolutions. Alan, back to you.
Yep, you got lots of love on your framework setting there, Prasad. So here's the question: is AI has been around for 50 years. What's unique? What's going on right now? Why 2022 to why 2023?
That's a great question. So yes, so in fact, AI technologies have been around. In fact, language models, natural language processing as an AI capability has been around for many years. And what has happened is an evolution has happened, but two fundamental things took place. There was a revolution in the form of a new architecture. I won't get into the technical details, but those of you who want to follow up and look up the transformer architecture that was invented actually at Google, that changed the nature of how these AI models were built in a way that was incredibly efficient. Also, fundamentally, we had a lot more compute power available now. We could spend, in the order of magnitude of tens of millions of dollars to come up with the first of those language models that were suddenly capable of doing so natural sounding things, so human capable things. And frankly, an emergent capability that even the designers of those models did not anticipate. And as a result, we find ourselves today. It's not 5 years ago, it's not 5 years from now. It's those two things coming together that have brought us this moment we're in right now.
Yeah, beautiful. So it's right here and now. So let's switch gears. Karen, you've been leading the people side of business, HR, learning, talent, and you've been doing this for fast-growing companies for a long time. You've had a front row seat to how all of this has evolved. So can you frame for us, how do you see this GenAI moment across the arc of your career?
Well, it's a really great question because I think Prasad talked a lot about the content and how this has really evolved how we think about content. I think about our workforce and this industrial revolution. So if you think about the phases of the industrial revolution, we had steam, we had electricity, we had electronics and computers, we had the internet, and now the birth of AI. All of these waves of change required people to think differently about how they work and the skills they needed to work. So for example, the first phase, when we introduced STEAM, it really changed people being from human power to machine power. It was a massive change. From my point of view, AI is the next phase in the change of how we work. I read an article recently that 30% of the skills that we learned 3 years ago aren't relevant today. So as learning and people leaders, there's a lot of opportunities for us to be having conversations with our leaders at what are the skills that we need? How do we develop them? And how do we use AI as a companion to help us about how we work, how we augment our work, how we automate it, and how we amplify it? So to me, GenAI is really the catalyst for the importance of reskilling people throughout their life. And we need to get people to think about this more proactively, even after we get over the excitement of this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, which is what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment. After we go all the hype, and be curious to get our audience's reactions a little later. Are we on the hype cycle? But everybody clearly is paying attention. That's something we need to do. Prasad, you talked a lot about not just content creation, but synthesis. And can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by all that? Because that's something that you've said, this is kind of revolutionary and new to have content creation and synthesis.
Yes, Alan, let me expand on that. So almost everyone should have by now had the experience of going to one of these large language models, whether it's Google Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic or anybody else, and typed a question or a prompt and gotten an answer back. And including almost everybody's done, write me an essay on topic X, with hunger in a particular country or something like that. Now, that is an example of content creation. That is where the model is generating content, not based on looking up things in a database, but actually based on the accumulated training it has obtained from the training set that has been provided. Now, that's an example of content generation. And that's great, and that's very powerful. Of course, it's extremely uncanny and very human-like. But I think we should also go beyond to understand that this is about content understanding. So you can actually give the model an essay. In that example, you could give an essay to the model and in fact ask the model to say, what does it think about the essay, to actually synthesize information based on content it has been provided. So, and that content synthesis is actually an even more amazing, for me, capability, because here's the thing. We have an enormous amount of content everywhere on the internet, on our own, within our own companies, and we can talk more about that. But the point is that extracting understanding from content is a lot of the job of an information worker, and this is the capability that this technology brings to bear. That, in fact, is incredibly useful, incredibly powerful in the hands of information workers.
Yeah, let's maybe, Karen, do you have an example of that? I know you've got things cooking inside Udemy. Maybe just talk a little bit about synthesis.
Absolutely. So we did our employee engagement survey last year, and we had over 3,000 comments. And I read every one of them, but we wanted to really synthesize all of that data. So we put all of the comments into AI and had them synthesize all the key themes. It saved hours of work for our learning partners and our people partners. And they were able to then focus on those major themes and really partner with our business leaders to focus on action planning and really leaning into driving employee engagement. So taking all of that content and synthesizing it, really a great way to look at data and to think a little bit differently about how we can save time reading through a lot of comments.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example used in HR context for employee engagement on saving time and effort and labor, and maybe even doing, a better job, but we know it will do it very fast. Prasad, you've talked about examples that you've seen in other areas. So maybe you could give us an example in sales or marketing about how GenAI can improve, just specific examples of how we get better by using this as a co-pilot or a friend or a tool.
Yes, good question. So there are many examples. So for example, let's take the example of a salesperson and doing an enterprise sales cycle for any large company. Enterprise sales cycles are complex. There's a large amount of information going back and forth. There's emails happening between not just the seller, but many different parts of the selling organization, whether it's a sales engineer, the customer success manager, or another manager going out to the main buyer or to other ancillary people. So there's a whole volume of emails happening. There's a volume of phone calls and conversations that are going on. And there's a large volume of meetings, online meetings, where conversations and information is exchanged. Documents go back and forth. So now the whole difficult job of a sales organization is to take all these different conversations that are happening and synthesize insights about them, and ultimately to find out whether a particular deal is likely to close, what the risks are, who the supporters are, what the detractors might be. And this is, of course, something that, of course, a salesperson can do, but they can be tremendously more assisted by synthesis of this information using a large language model, and giving them the insights of what's actually happening in the deal as a whole, deal by deal, and of course in aggregate across all the sales pipeline. This is a critical functionality for many, many companies. And by the way, this is something that in a prior company, as a technology, we were already working on.
Yeah, so Prasad, if you take that to its logical conclusion, we're improving productivity dramatically. So either the same amount of salespeople are going to produce more sales, or we can improve productivity and hire and grow faster by building more productive salespeople.
Absolutely. I mean, that to me is one of the ways, you cited those numbers from the studies, McKinsey and other studies up front, and essentially the productivity gains are always a positive thing. We should look at, history has taught us, economics has taught us that when technology comes along and makes people more productive, wages go up, productivity goes up, wages go up, and as a result, the economy as a whole lifts up. So productivity is a positive thing. It may look in the short run as a negative thing from a jobs standpoint, but in the aggregate, it has been proven again and again that productivity increases are actually net positive from an economic standpoint and from an individual standpoint.
Yep, beautiful. So we're going to get to, we'll unpack that a little later just to give everybody a sneak preview. One topic that we've heard loud and clear is about worrying about jobs in the future and what happens to my job. So we're going to go and unpack that. Before we do, I want to get to one last point in this kind of orientation. And it's really this misconception. There are people who have gone to that have reduced what they believe GenAI is to a search engine on steroids. And it's because they've gone to ChatGPT or Gemini or Microsoft, and they think that it's just that kind of open product, the LLM. But there is an enormous amount of company data that can be unlocked and used this way. And I think people haven't thought about that. So I'm wondering, maybe we'll start with you, Prasad, about what do you how are companies thinking about this and using it in the company and the jobs inside the company, more of proprietary data?
Absolutely. So, by the poll that we saw earlier today, it looks like a lot of our audience is well on the way. But just to spell it out explicitly, to be very clear, when I talked about synthesis, I wanted to make sure we make a distinction between training and content that doesn't have to be trained with. So when you talk about training of an AI model, it's been trained on all this public information. Think of it as it has all the abilities to understand stuff, but there's a large amount of content living inside of corporate walls that is, of course, not being provided to the training to the AI models for training, and that content is in fact what information workers in business settings in fact care the most about. The good news is that the technology is available, that we don't need to train these AI models with all of this content. We can do other techniques, from a technical standpoint. It's called retrieval augmented generation, RAG. Those who are technically oriented on this call can go look it up. But the simple way to explain that is that content that is sitting inside of your corporate walls can in fact be searched on, extracted, and a subset of that extracted in order to feed to the large language model to do the synthesis and insight work that we're talking about. So in fact, what Karen described earlier, where she said we took all this information and synthesized the insights out of it, was a good example of that, of taking corporate information and being able to feed subsets of it in a prompt to a learning model, to a large language model, I should say, and extract the insights that you need. And that is a common pattern. That is going to, in fact, become the dominant pattern. And you're going to see more and more of these, the co-pilots and the assistants, show up in the context of your documents and your content to help you do that more and more.
Yeah, and that feels a lot more powerful to me, and a piece that hasn't been, people are still struggling, and we'll talk about a little later with some of the regulatory risks and compliance risks and security risks. So we're not, these things aren't fully deployed inside companies. But Karen, maybe you could give us an example of where you see GenAI evolving for a company across the entire employee experience?
Absolutely. So last December, unfortunately, I had a check stolen that someone forged and wrote out for almost $10,000. So I had to close my bank account. And I should know, but I didn't know how to change my direct deposit. So I had to reach out, look through our 631 HR wiki pages, and then reach out to my HR business partner because I couldn't find the answer. What we're building now is we're really mapping out the employee experience and the phases of the employee experience where we can have an HR buddy that can answer basic questions for people like, how do I change my direct deposit? How do I change my benefits? So really automating some menial task through an HR buddy that really brings to life instant answers for people and really creates a great employee experience using our own 631 wiki pages to synthesize all of that data and make it much faster.
So I don't have to sort through 631 pages of wiki stuff to get answers to my questions?
Not anymore.
Beautiful. So we know the promise, the upside, the market analysts. We've talked about the framing. This is kind of a watershed moment, right? So for those of us that have had multi-decade careers, this is as big as anything any of us have seen. I'm not being hyperbolic. I think it's true. So let's move on from the where we are right now, where we've come from in this historical context. Let's unpack the survey for our audience. January of this year, we surveyed 2,500 people, and we had broad demographics, so industry sizes, levels of seniority, and this is kind of this is the first slide that sets us up. And I would encourage you to think about, just look at this slide as we're kind of looking at curves and so on. When we look at the next, we got about 5 or 6 of these, and think of this one as a hockey stick. It kind of goes straight and then it slopes very steeply to the right. And what that tells us is that there's a pretty strong response that effective leadership is really, really important for this moment for GenAI, that we can't, you're not going to harness this power without effective leaders driving it. And I would say, this isn't something that we delegate, right? We're going to have to take control. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at, so you see this one is more of a bell curve. And this one, so it's not that hockey, it's almost like at the very beginning. Some are confident, a bigger group are less confident. And I think if we look at research from a lot of companies, including Udemy, but I'll just say Forrester Research and Workday, they surveyed leaders and found that nearly 2/3 of leaders say they haven't been given adequate training to take advantage of AI. So this is one of the things that we see here is that leadership's ability, that confidence starts to fall. So everybody believes it's important. That was our first slide, but our ability is a little less, a little shaky. So we're a little worried. So if we go to the next slide, we're talking team readiness. Prasad, you want to comment on this one?
You know, leadership team's readiness is an important element to talk about. It's very simple. Every leader needs to understand this GenAI capability, not just as some abstract remote thing that they're listening to, for example, even on this webinar, but actually go and get their hands and fingers dirty. If you haven't spent a significant amount of time understanding some basic prompt engineering, by the way, we have some great Udemy courses that can help you with that, or you can find resources wherever you want, but essentially understand the types of prompts you can give to a GenAI, to a large language model, and what it can generate for you. It's just a basic sort of level of familiarity. And also I would recommend having a basic level of understanding of the key terminology. What is training? What is a model? What is inference? What is expensive and what is not so expensive? What is the role of what I spoke earlier, retrieval augmented generation? All of these things are core constructs, core concepts that I remember back in the early days of the web, Alan, I had to explain to people what is a URL and what is a website and what is a hyperlink. Well, it all became part of the lexicon. In the same way, all these things I'm talking about are going to become part of our standard day-to-day lexicon. And the faster you get there, the better. You all need to be armed with that basic knowledge of how this technology works. I'm just speaking from a technologist standpoint, but that's just my bias.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear if we look at the data, we say it's crucial that leadership drive this. And the second one is they don't have the skills they need. So this is just something that can't be delegated. So the readiness isn't there. The confidence in people, in leaders isn't there. And it's a complicated topic. So if we go to the next slide, we look at risks and ethical issues. So we know that there are a lot of risks coming on this. And so, Karen, how do you think about policy and legal concerns from an HR perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I attend a lot of learning conferences and HR conferences with my peers. And it's one of the biggest things we're all talking about right now is how do we do this ethically? And I saw some of the comments about caring for people too. So a couple of the things that we're also learning, I think we all know that AI can hallucinate and become biased. So at Udemy, we're continually thinking about like, how do we fact check the data and information that's being shared with AI to make sure that data and information is accurate? I'm also partnering closely with our legal team, and we're continually evolving our AI policy and experimenting with AI and learning from that too. One of our core values is courageously experimental. And so we're actually just doing trials and tests to make sure that it doesn't cause ethical concerns or risk to the company. If you think about earlier when I shared the example of the HR buddy, all the information that we're pulling from that wiki isn't private, confidential, or intellectual property. So we're making sure that we're protecting private data and intellectual property when we're rolling out these tools. The other thing that I mentioned is we know AI can be biased. So we're really putting our foot in the water around how we use that for hiring to ensure that we aren't creating bias in our hiring processes. And the last thing I'd mention is that, it's really important that all of our employees are educated on how to use AI ethically and not to compromise our intellectual property or private information. So we've done a lot of learning for our employees as well. And I know Prasad and I have talked a lot about content and how that content is owned and preserved. So I'd love to turn to Prasad and hear a little bit about how you think about content and preserving the integrity of the content.
That's a great question. And this is a hot topic, as you might imagine. You may have heard about the scenarios in the public domain where certain content owners, like the New York Times, are talking about their content having been used for various AI model training. But I want to make sure we make a clear distinction between content that is used for model training and content that is just used for inference or synthesis of insights. And leaders here really need to understand the distinction between those two, because the first one, you have to have a lot of consideration of the owner of the content. And because you're taking the content from the owners and you are actually modifying something about an AI model, its so-called internal weights, and it's essentially the way it operates, the way it does what it does. And that is very hard to undo. That step is highly irreversible. It's sort of a one-way step. And to do that step all over again is extremely expensive. That training step is extremely expensive. Now, on the other hand, you might use content just for inference. In your example that you gave, Karen, earlier about the survey results and the survey response that you wanted to get synthesis of information from, well, that did not go to training the model weights or did not change the state of the model any. Whether it saw that information or not didn't make a difference to how the model fundamentally operates. And in that example, you just have to make sure that the mechanisms of making sure any data you share with any SaaS provider that you have is protected. But that we know how to do. We have emails and documents and SaaS systems that contain company data all the time. And there's enough legal frameworks to make sure that part is protected. So in that situation, the usual frameworks of SaaS and data protections apply, and you should feel quite comfortable with that. So it's basically a simple litmus test. Is this content going to change the model weights in the model itself, or is this content just being used for the sake of the inference that I want to do at a given point in time? And you need to think differently about those two things from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, I think if I summarize what you both just said, Karen and Prasad, you can see on this chart that it skews more to the left. It tells us that we don't feel, we're not that well equipped and a little worried. So this is obviously risks, and ethical is a huge area for people to think about. And if we go to the next slide, I believe this is our last one. This is around communication, and we're going to drill into this much deeper. But the point on this one is just to say, this is the area that actually scored the weakest. So this one skews the most to the left. It's almost like the hockey stick going the opposite direction. It tells us that people are not feeling good about communication. And it reminded me, I don't know why, it just jumped into my mind, but there's this famous story that Warren Buffett, he went back to Columbia University, and he was his alma mater where he got his MBA, and he was talking to the students, and he said, if I'll give any of you $100,000 today in cash, if you give me 10% of your income for a lifetime. And then he went on to say, if you're a good communicator, I'll give you $150,000. He essentially, what he said is he's placing a 50% value increase on your ability to communicate as a leader. So 150% value for being a good communicator. And so I think we all would agree, and we look at our research at Udemy, we study billions of data points, searches in our key skills and leadership skills. And we know that in leadership communications always ranks in the top 2 or 3. So we're going to unpack this one because it's important. We'll get to it, but I just wanted to give us that. If we can go to the next slide, I'd love to just get for everyone, Prasad and Karen, to give us thoughts on, this is kind of the picture. This is the summary of the last 5 slides. So maybe something that jumps out for you, Karen, and something that you see here that surprises you or changes your thinking.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the confidence piece was, and what really resonated me for this one was, this is change leadership. And I think someone mentioned that in one of the comments, that rolling out AI is really about how do our leaders drive through change. And so if we're not well educated or well versed on what AI is, the risk of it, the biases around it, as leaders, we can't then instill confidence in our organization. So how do we enable leaders to really drive through this change and be confident in leading their organization in this change and not be afraid of it? So that confidence piece really stood out, and the need for change management really resonated.
Yeah, super. Prasad, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that starts, that's where the problem starts, and it leads to the rest of the problems. If you don't have, if you're not perceived as having confidence in your GenAI strategy, then obviously you're not showing readiness. You can't manage the risks. You can't communicate it properly. So let's do that. Let's just go ahead and talk now about how we can give some specific guidance to our listeners of how we change the colored parts of these dials on the right to be more fuller than they are in this, increase the percentages here on these right 4 dials that are really much lower than the first one. The need is high, but there's a big gap.
Yep. Thank you, Prasad. So let's start with that. So at a high level, the biggest, and I've seen it in the comments here, and we're going to get to questions too, folks, but a bunch of the comments were around, like, some of this is just leading change. Very true. But according to McKinsey research, and this research, they've been doing it for 25 years. It hasn't changed. 70% of change efforts fail to achieve the desired results. Particularly digital transformations are even trickier. And the stakes are high with GenAI, and we can see these huge gaps. So Karen, let's start with you, thinking specifically leading bold change. How are you? You're one of the few people that are actually doing this, right? We went out and looked at a lot of chief learning officers, chief people officers, and said, well, how confident are you in leading GenAI change? And it comes back like nobody feels good about this, and you're sort of deeply steeped in it. So talk to us about how you're doing that, how you're leading this big change.
Great question. So I think a lot of it has to do with I have a background in learning and org development, and then have moved into the people partner role later in my career. And a part of it is like doing a needs assessment, right? So last summer and last spring, sitting down with our CEO and our leadership team and thinking about AI as a competitive differentiator for our company. So what were the skills that we needed in our organization to really lead through this transformation? So spend a lot of time with our staff and our VPs, really identifying where were our gaps, how did we build confidence in the organization, and how did we lead through this? So we then created a change management plan. It was part of our talent plan and talent strategy around how will we lead, help leaders lead through change. We have something called priority skills at Udemy. And one of our big priority skills this year is leading through change. And the second one is coaching. So we really leaned in to focus on what are the skills that leaders need to lead through this type of change? And then how do they coach and develop and lead their employees through this type of change? So we started out with our leaders, and then we cascaded it down through the whole organization. This spring, I'm going to sit down with all of our leaders and look at their org design. How are they thinking about the skills they need to deliver on our long-range plan and deliver on the success for our company? What tasks can AI do to get rid of some of the menial, repetitive work? And then how do we help continue to invest in the skills and develop our employees so that they can grow their careers with us for the long term?
Yeah, those are great takeaways for leading breakthrough change and creating that buy-in with the leadership team, and looking at organization capabilities and figuring out with every leader, where are the parts that we can sort of offload this to GenAI and drive productivity improvements or get people doing more higher value added work. Makes a lot of sense. Do we want to talk about an example where you're doing that? Did we put that? Can we pull up that slide maybe, Jade? I wanted to yeah, there you go. Karen, just give us another example on this experience.
Absolutely. So this is how we're really looking at like transforming the employee experience and also building leader skills. And we're looking at it really in three ways. One is, how do we augment the skills that employees need? Two is, how do we automate? And then three is, how do we have that systems thinking approach to really amplifying with GenAI? So on the first one, our learning team last year, we were trying to create an assessment for leader development to determine like how well our leaders were doing after they took some of our learning programs. So we created a learning assessment, and then we put it into AI to help learn with us and used it as a learning buddy. We then refined that assessment, and I think it's one of the best assessments that we've created as a team, using our great learning team combined with our partnership with AI, and then taking all of that and refining it. Really great way to augment our skill set. The second thing we did is one of my teams, we went to really align around our priorities each week and make sure we were all aligned and like leading in the same direction. That was a really manual task for our EA to put a question in every week. What are you doing this week? What successes did you have this week? So we leveraged AI in Slack. Every Monday morning, our team gets, what are your top 3 priorities for this week? Everyone fills it in, everyone adds to it. It's great to see what people are focused on, and then we're all aligned and informed. And then at the end of the week, we're asking, what were your greatest accomplishments? So a little bit of recognition and rewards around how we're delivering against our goals. And then finally, amplifying it. How do we go back to, again, that same employee experience when I talked about our HR buddy, and creating systems within our organization to really amplify and making some menial tasks more automated. So our people partners, our learning partners can help coach our employees. They can lean in with leaders to drive engagement and focus on some more of the strategic work and some more of that human connection.
Beautiful. All right, Karen, so you gave us the overview of kind of leading breakthrough change and some of the change principles and how you thought about it and some of the things you did in org design and learning examples and using GenAI, which were perfect. The next big thing is setting your vision for Gen AI. So we see that that leaders haven't done a very good job of that. And I think that's something that we've done a good job at Udemy. So Prasad, you worked with the team to set the Gen AI vision for Udemy, and then you did it again for a vision for the product team to contribute. How can we as a product team contribute to the broader enterprise? So what advice do you have for leaders who are struggling to craft a vision for their company or their function or their team?
Good question, Alan. So number one is conviction. Conviction comes from your own earned experience and knowledge about the capability of what this can bring. And like I said earlier in the conversation, there's no reason why you can't get that with a little bit of work, a little bit of Udemy courses that can guide you, etc. You can go get that conviction, your own firsthand feeling of the power and relevance of this technology to your business. The other part is clarity. How do you communicate clarity once you have that conviction? So here's a specific recommendation I would make. Going back to my content revolution point, look at your organization from a content standpoint. Do an audit of your content in the capital C content, not just small c content, and look at it from the point of view of where is it created? Is it created internally? Is it created externally? Is the nature of the content such that it is created by your employees? Is it created by your customers? Or is it created by, the sort of outside, people in social media, for example? So figure out where your content is coming from and who's creating it, and draw a pathway from that content to say, okay, what do we do with these different types of content? Is it something that we have to synthesize information out of? That's one category of things you may want to do. Or is it something that we create a lot of? You might be a marketing department that's creating a lot of content. So you have to sort of essentially do an audit of all your content types, all your content sources, and whether your focus is on synthesis or creation, go ahead and make a map out of that. And then from there, flow out your strategy of what you will do. How will you use Gen AI to assist in each of these areas? And I assure you, I guarantee you, you will find lots of applications once you put those things together.
Got it. So conviction and clarity are key. So I'm going to build a bridge right off of that. We talked about leading change. We've set the vision. Now let's talk about communicating the way forward. This is the area that we were the weakest. We've been hinting at it, but I want to go specific. John Kotter, the famous Harvard Business School professor, created Kotter's change principles. He's got 8 famous principles, and 3 of his 8 principles are all about communications, right? So you got to generate a sense of urgency, develop the vision, and communicate for buy-in. So that's 3 of the 8. Prasad, you just gave us the developing the vision, Karen, the overall framework. But let's go in, Karen. How are you dealing with just communicating this way forward with people?
Great. So I'll go back to last year. Our CEO, we use Slack pretty much for everything. So our CEO sent out a Slack message to our company about how excited we are to transform lives through learning, but how also AI is going to be new and a disruptor in how we build skills. And so he sent out a note to the whole company, like really communicating his vision for all of us to be experts in AI and how we can all learn together. And it started with our leaders. So he got the company really excited about the vision and where we were headed with AI. We had all of our leaders take a whole learning path around how do leaders first learn about AI? How do they learn about what it is, what it isn't, the biases, and then they all took learning paths. So every one of our leaders participated in a learning path around how to lead our company through this transformation. And then we Slacked every week. So one of our leadership team Slacked every week. Hey, here's how we're progressing. Here's what I'm learning. Share what you're learning. And we got over 1,000 employees to take their AI learning paths. And we learned so much from our employees. People grabbed me in the hall and told me about how they and their team are thinking about using AI in the work that they do and like how excited they were. And we did crowdsourcing in Slack and people were sharing so many great ideas. It became contagious. So I think that back to Kotter's, that communication, getting people excited and rallied around a vision and taking away the scariness of the unknown by helping learn and educate together and have fun with it. That's how we got our organization to really embrace AI and to learn together.
Yeah, I love it. I want to talk about this fear of the unknown. So we've covered a lot of the change principles and the urgency drivers, right? And getting buy-in. But let's talk about concern about jobs. In our study, we found 79% of people are worried to some extent about their job. They're not optimistic. Prasad, you and I discussed, and Karen, a New York Times article that you shared, citing one of their top MIT's top labor economists, who has been a tech bear forever, saying the technology doesn't create the middle class jobs that everybody had hoped. But the key to the article, this is yesterday or the day before, is that he's now become, for the first time ever in decades, a GenAI tech bull. He believes that this may actually benefit the least skilled people the most. So Prasad, I want to start with you. Are you a bull or a bear when it comes to middle-class jobs in the GenAI future?
I'm a bull in the medium term right now, and that's as far as I can see, to be perfectly honest. And I'll tell you why. GenAI has the capability to take entry-level workers or even mid-level workers and accelerate their position in the organization and their contribution to the organization much, much quicker. Imagine a new marketing person who comes into an organization who needs to synthesize a new piece of marketing content or create a new piece of marketing content. Well, first they need to understand what went before, what was the mood, what have we said, what are the key messages. And these things are much easier synthesized very quickly with the help of GenAI, giving the insights and make their learning and onboarding much, much quicker, much faster. And then they can be off and running to using these tools as an augmentation of their core capability. So this is something a software engineer joining a company can have the GenAI synthesize the insights about all the existing code base in a much shorter time and then make their own contribution in a much faster time. So I think this will give an accelerant to essentially lesser skilled entry-level workers and essentially make a transition to information work possible for those who are not even in information work. People say in the context of programming, hey, English becomes a new programming language, and this helps people become, create constructs that they could not do before, that with the help of GenAI. So I think overall, I'm very, very bullish on uplifting the skills of capable workers. But keep in mind, you need to give some effort. You need to do some amount of learning, some amount of reskilling, some amount of training so that you can take advantage of this opportunity.
But in the end, given the motivation to learn, you believe you're a bull on this. You believe this is going to the middle class or middle skill people, that this is going to make them more productive and create more opportunities and more jobs.
Yes.
Karen, how about you? Are you a bull or a bear on this?
I'm completely with Prasad. I think it's going to create more opportunities for people. I've worked for a company where we had a really large frontline workforce. And one of the things that we saw with that workforce is with automation, some of the skills were becoming depleted. And so we used AI to really figure out how can we help create learning paths for people to build different career paths. And we're going to be doing that here at Udemy as well. And I'm really excited about the career paths we're creating. But really looking at how to help create and reskill people is really what I'm excited about with AI and the future of work for this case.
So if $7 to $15 trillion of new economic value gets created globally, there's going to be a great opportunity for people that take advantage of this point in time, that are so motivated to learn, to reskill, retool, and build the capability. It sounds like you're both bulls, and we've got a lot of opportunities. Let's keep moving because we're rapidly getting to the end, but I think there's some important lessons here just about the scale of what we're doing at Udemy that I think there are some key teaching points to peel out of this. So if you just look at the size and scale, well, first of all, maybe Prasad, 30 seconds on what you see right there.
Yeah, so GenAI is massive in terms of content. If you have, in broad terms, we were the first content company learning company, I should say, that provided GenAI course content within like a week or two of when the technology came out. Today, we have 1,600 courses on GenAI, 3 million course enrollments, 79 million minutes consumed of GenAI learning. So a tremendous amount of content is available on our platform already today.
Yeah, so I think, Karen, can you talk a little bit about just how you as a user of this got several thousand people to do this? How did you use Udemy and connect people to help build this capability fast?
We looked at the skills that were needed for leaders and for every employee to get informed on this. And we assigned everyone a learning pass with our content. So we leveraged our instructors and the content that we had on Udemy. And then we were able to pull reports and track, like, how are we doing? Where do we need to lean in? But leveraging those learning paths was really impactful, and it really helped us cater the learning to different target audience.
And Karen, how do you respond to people that say, I'm too busy, I'm, time starved? I hear a lot of our customers, I hear people talking to me all the time. I can't get thousands of people to do this. They're too busy. What's the answer? You did it.
We build it into the flow of work. So when I talked earlier about those Slack questions, how will you leverage AI in your flow of work? We related it back to people's work. But then at Udemy, we also have U-Days. So we have dedicated time for people to learn and develop, again, based on either priority skills or on their work. And so we carved out some of that time for people to do this learning too, but really integrating it to people's work and how they think about this in the frame of their roles.
Yeah, beautiful. Prasad, I want to close with you just in terms of the scale. One thing you've talked about is all this data, proprietary data that companies have. And with Udemy having 70 million learners, 70,000 instructors, hundreds of thousands of courses, you're sitting on probably the largest data set of learning anywhere in the world. So how will GenAI impact the learning experience? What are you going to do with the product?
Yes, we're making tremendous use of this in our product. So one of the things we're working on actively to bring to the market is a Udemy Learning Assistant, which is essentially a chatbot AI that sits with you alongside your course taking experience that allows you to ask questions as you go and ask clarifications. So not only are you consuming what the instructor said, but you're actually asking questions. And by the way, that the answers to those questions are based on the instructor content so that it's in the context of what you're learning. The other thing we're doing for organizations is something called skills mapping. If organizations want to upskill their employees in a particular skill, whether it's project management or Python or data science or leadership, we can have you type in your specific needs to our skills mapping capability that generates a skills tree that describes those skills in detail, and that generates a learning path that actually sends you through the actual content of our courses to perform that upskilling. All this stuff is stuff that we're actually working on, leveraging exactly the massive content that we do have.
Wow, it's all coming together. Prasad, Karen, thank you very much on behalf of our several thousand registrations people for today's event. I want to thank you guys for taking time, all of you. Thanks so much for your insight for today. And Jade, maybe we'll pass it back to you to bring us home.
Yes, thank you so much, Prasad. Thank you so much, Karen and Alan. This was a great conversation to have. We'll also share this resource in a follow-up email. But I want to thank everyone for joining today's session. We've come to the end of the road. This has been an amazing webinar. I can't thank our moderator enough, Alan, and our wonderful guest speakers, Prasad and Karen.